From classrooms in Laguna to a ravine in Cebu, from missing fathers of e-sabong to a Delhi suburbs drain, to a Bangkok house where barrels hissed in the dark. 5 stories, 5 fault lines where power, money, and neglect met ordinary people and shattered their lives. Tonight, we track how fear becomes control, how systems bend or break, and how families fight to make the law mean something. This is a journey through crimes that shook nations because they forced the hardest question of all. If justice does not arrive on time, what arrives instead? Before we dive into these chilling real-life stories, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because here, we uncover the stories that many would rather forget, but the world needs to hear. The Sarmenta Gomez murder, 1993. 2 college students leave campus on an ordinary night. By morning, the nation is in shock confronted with a crime so cruel, it would redefine how Filipinos speak about power, justice, and the value of a single human life. Eileen Sarmenta and Alan Gomez were students at the University of the Philippines Los Barras, UPLB, driven and full of plans. Friends remember Eileen's quiet warmth and Alan's easy humor. They represented everything a community hopes for: talent, kindness, and possibility. Just a few towns away lay a different kind of power. Calauan, Laguna, was ruled by then-Mayor Antonio Sanchez, a local strongman known for his confidence, his swagger, and the men who followed his orders. In the early 1990s, political power in many places could feel like a personal weapon, wielded without fear of consequence. People whispered, complied, and tried not to look too long at the wrong things. June 1993, night air, campus quiet. Eileen and Alan are seized by armed men tied to the mayor's circle. The order, investigators would later say, came from Sanchez himself. Eileen was to be delivered to him as a gift. Alan, snatched alongside her, would become collateral, a witness who could not be allowed to live. The terror was immediate and calculated. It was not a crime of impulse. It was a crime of power, a display, a message, a claim that no law could bind a man who believed he was the law. What happened next has been documented in court records and remembered with pain. Eileen was presented to Sanchez and sexually assaulted. Alan was beaten and later killed. Eileen too was murdered. The details are not needed to understand the horror. What matters is the deliberate nature of the harm. The certainty that those responsible thought they could do this and walk away untouched. Word spread, first in whispers, then in headlines. Parents gripped their children closer. Students walked in groups. On campuses across the country, anger rose. If this could happen to Eileen and Alan, under the protection of an elected official, what safety did ordinary people have? The police investigation, under intense public scrutiny, began to cut through the fear. Witnesses came forward. Physical evidence tied the mayor's men to the crime. The case refused to be buried. The nation would not allow it. Prosecutors worked methodically. They mapped movements, recovered items, and tracked the chain of command. The picture that emerged was chilling in its clarity. This was not chaos. It was orchestration. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric, families holding each other's hands, journalists filling the aisles, lawyers measuring every word. For many, it felt less like a single trial and more like a referendum. Could the justice system stand up to the weight of political power? It did. Then Mayor Antonio Sanchez and several of his men were convicted. Sanchez received multiple life terms. Reclusion perpetua for the kidnapping, rape, and murders of Eileen Sarmenta and Alan Gomez. The decision offered a measure of justice, though never enough to fill the absence. It told the country something vital, that public office does not grant immunity from the law, that a mayor is not above a student. That power, when used to harm, will be answered with accountability. Years passed. Then, in 2019, the case roared back into the national conversation. Under a law on good conduct time allowance, news broke that Sanchez might be released early. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. Students, parents, survivors' advocates, and ordinary citizens flooded the streets and the airwaves. No. The outrage was not only about one man. It was about what early release would say to victims everywhere. That even the most heinous crimes could be negotiated away with technicalities. Authorities ultimately reversed course. Sanchez did not walk free. The public had spoken and institutions listened. The system had been tested again, and again it learned. Laws must serve justice, not erase it. In the retelling of infamous cases, the perpetrators' names can grow loud. But here, the gravity belongs to the victims. Eileen Sarmenta and Alan Gomez were more than the worst thing that happened to them. They were scholars, children, friends. They had plans of graduation, a first job, perhaps a family someday. All of that was taken. When we say their names, we are not reliving violence for shock. We are demanding a world where power protects the powerless, where students are safe, and where public trust is not a costume for private cruelty. Justice in this story is complicated. A conviction offers accountability, but it doesn't restore time. It doesn't erase the memories that keep families awake in the dark. And yet, justice matters. It draws a boundary in the sand and says, no more. For the Philippines, the Sarmenta Gomez case became a lesson in civic vigilance. It taught the public to monitor laws, to question who benefits from them, and to insist loudly that reforms never trample the dignity of victims. Every community has a responsibility to make abuse of power more difficult, to make reporting safer, and to ensure that every Eileen and every Alan is protected by systems that work. That means independent investigations, witness protection, and a culture that refuses to shrug at intimidation. It also means remembering. Forgetting is the ally of impunity. Remembering is the beginning of change. Eileen Sarmenta and Alan Gomez deserved a lifetime. What they were given, in the end, was a country that woke up, demanded justice, and learned to defend it. Their story is not only about what was lost, it's about what a nation chose to guard. The idea that no one, not even the powerful, stands above the law. If abuse of power can destroy 2 students in a single night, what happens when the system itself is on trial? Cebu would soon find out. The Chiong Sisters case, 1997. 2 sisters vanish on a rainy night in Cebu. One body is found at a ravine. The other is never seen again. What follows is not only a hunt for the truth, but a national argument about justice itself. July 1997. Marijoy and Jacqueline Chiong leave the cinema and step into a humid Cebu evening. They are young, close, and careful, planning to head home together. Somewhere between familiar streets and the safety of their house, the world closes in. Witnesses will later recall a vehicle, a struggle, and the frantic blur of voices. By morning, the sisters are missing. Days later, a body is discovered in a ravine outside the city. Identified as Marijoy, it bears the weight of violence and the silence of unanswered questions. Jacqueline does not come home. The Chiong family, and then the country, is thrust into a shared nightmare. 2 daughters of Cebu torn from the life they knew. One confirmed dead, one missing to this day. Public pressure builds. Cebu's streets thrum with outrage and fear. Parents clutch their children's hands. Curfews tighten and rumors multiply. Police work intensifies. Names begin to circulate, among them a young man from a prominent family, Francisco Paco Laragaga. When authorities move to charge Paco and 6 others, the story explodes from a local crime into a national spectacle. In court, prosecutors present a narrative of abduction, sexual assault, and murder. They name roles for each accused: who watched, who drove, who ordered. They anchor their case in witness testimony, and a timeline they argue is consistent with the crime's brutal sequence. For the grieving family, the case offers a path toward accountability. For much of the public, it offers an explanation terrible, but finally coherent. The defense counters with alibis and timelines of their own. Paco's camp points to classmates and instructors who say he was in Manila the night of the crime, taking exams, eating at restaurants, appearing in places that they claim make the Cebu offense physically impossible for him to commit. They challenge identifications, question procedures, and highlight gaps they say the state cannot bridge. The courtroom atmosphere turns electric. Reporters jam doorways, radio shows thrum with debate, and citizens take sides. The judge weighs testimony that is passionate, contradictory, and often contested. Every ruling, admissions, exclusions, objections, becomes fodder for a country trying to determine who to trust. The state seeking justice for 2 sisters, or the defendants insisting the system is rushing to judgment. The gavel falls. Paco Laragaga and 6 others are convicted. Severe penalties are imposed under the law at the time. For many, it feels like the long night has a dawn. The courts have spoken. But for others, the verdict does not end the questions, it multiplies them. Could the timeline be wrong? Were witnesses reliable? Did status and public pressure bend the scales? As the years pass, doubts coalesce into a movement. Supporters of PACO amplify affidavits from classmates and teachers, travel records, and contradictions in recollections. Human rights advocates and international observers raise concerns about procedure and fairness. Documentaries and investigative features put the case under a harsh new light, reframing it not only as a horrific crime but also as a potential miscarriage of justice. At the center is a grief that cannot be reconciled by debate. The Chiong family lost Marijoy and lives with the unending absence of Jacqueline. For them, the conviction is a measure of dignity restored, a recognition that their daughters mattered. On the other side are the families of the convicted, living with the belief that their sons were condemned by a flawed process. Both households wake to the same reality, a system that cannot produce what they want: most Marijoy alive, Jacqueline found, and an unarguable truth. In later years, under a bilateral treaty, PACO is transferred to Spain to serve his sentence there, a legal pathway that keeps the conviction intact while moving the prisoner. The transfer does not end the argument. It exports it. Court papers and campaigns cross borders. The case becomes a cautionary tale in law schools and journalism classes, about evidence, public pressure, and how stories harden into verdicts. It is the collision of two terrors. First, the terror of what happened to Marijoy and Jacqueline, young women seized from ordinary life, subjected to unthinkable harm. Second, the terror that the system charged with protecting us might be capable of error. When those fears exist together, every headline feels like a referendum on what kind of society we are. We know a young woman died. We know another is missing. We know a court convicted 7 men. We also know that serious good faith questions persist about the investigation and trial. Holding these truths at once is uncomfortable, but necessary. Justice is not only a destination, it is a discipline. It requires the courage to punish the guilty and the humility to interrogate our own certainties. First, speed is never a substitute for rigor. High-profile crimes demand more patience, not less. Second, every witness must be tested by careful, consistent procedures. Third, timelines matter. They are the skeleton that holds a case upright. And finally, public pressure should never be allowed to do what only proof can. If we want verdicts that endure, we must build them on foundations that do not crack. The Chiong Sisters case will always be a wound, because one sister lies in a grave and the other's fate is unknown. Whether you believe the verdicts were just or flawed, one truth is fixed. A society worthy of its daughters keeps searching for the full story, for the missing, for standards that protect both the vulnerable and the accused. Until Jacqueline is found, until every doubt is answered, the echo remains. And in that echo, a promise. To seek the truth with a steadier hand than fear, and a deeper love than outrage. From a courtroom that split the country, we shift to vans and parking lots, where men vanished not by verdict, but by design. The Sabungero Disappearances, 2021 to 2022. They left home with cash in their pockets and hope in their voices, some for the pit, some for a payout, some for a simple night with friends. 34 men would never return. In the Philippines, they're called Sabungeros, cockfighting regulars. Their disappearance became a national riddle with whispered names, midnight videos, and rumors of a lake holding more than water. Before the vanishings, sabong wasn't just a pastime, it was a system. Bets, brokers, handlers, drivers, lookouts. Then the pandemic years supercharged the trade. E-sabong online betting meant money could move at the speed of a tap. Winners bragged in chat groups. Losers borrowed, then borrowed again. Where money concentrates, power follows. Where power gathers, someone always wants control. Late 2021, a man doesn't make it home after a derby. His family calls, messages, pleads, days pass, nothing. Then another gambler goes silent. Then a crew of handlers. By early 2022, police tallies show at least 34 missing across Luzon, snatched from parking lots. Boarding vans led away by men who seemed official enough that nobody screamed until it was too late. What held these strangers together? 3 threads. Money lost or owed, inside knowledge about game fixing, and the gravitational pull of e-sabong hubs. Text chains hinted at invites to meet, settle a bill, or join a high roller table. CCTV clips, cold and grainy, captured last smiles, last steps, last moments when anyone could have intervened. As the missing list grew, the nation turned anxious. At terminals and alleys, every unmarked van looked like a trap. Radio callers spoke in code. Families taped handwritten posters to police gates. Some officers promised action. Others shrugged with a practiced caution that sounded like distance. The question wasn't just, where are they? It was, who dares to take people in plain sight and why aren't they afraid? Investigators traced chat groups and betting wallets. Rumors hardened. Syndicates fixing outcomes, insiders steering fights, debts enforced not with lawyers but with rope. In testimonies, a few names surfaced: handlers, drivers, enforcers. Then came the shock. Allegations of police involvement. Not all, not most, but enough to make citizens wonder if the badge on one man's chest was cover for another man's crime. And then, a whisper turned to a statement. A witness claimed that some victims were strangled, mutilated, and dumped into Taal Lake, one of the country's most storied waters. The number floated was monstrous, perhaps over 100 bodies below. Was it truth? Terror? Disinformation to paralyze? Divers searched. Families watched shorelines as if grief could draw up answers from the deep. Mothers knocked on doors until their knuckles bled. Wives learned to speak to cameras they never wanted to face. Sons and daughters stood at press briefings clutching photos while officials deployed phrases like ongoing coordination. In living rooms across Luzon, empty chairs took on the weight of altars. The missing were not headlines to these families. They were light bills, school fees, birthdays, inside jokes. They were everything. Public pressure rose. Lawmakers called hearings. The administration shuttered e-sabong operations nationwide, citing social harms and the disappearances. Money stopped flowing as easily. Some doors closed. Others simply moved addresses and learned to whisper. But shuttering the pipeline wasn't the same as finding the men. The families wanted bodies, answers, accountability, not just a policy change. A few arrests came people linked to specific abductions. Warrants were issued, suspects vanished, stories shifted. Some officers were named in complaints, suspended, or reassigned pending investigations. Each development felt both monumental and small because the number 34 did not shrink. Proving a conspiracy is not a straight line, it is a maze where every corner is another locked door. If these disappearances were a message, what did it say? It said that money can mimic authority, that uniforms can be rented, that a convoy at night can part crowds the way a siren does. It said that controlling a market requires more than odds, it requires fear. And it taught an even harsher lesson. When criminals borrow the rituals of state power, the public loses the reflex to resist. Let's name what the ledger never counts. The embarrassed silence of a father who gambled to pay for a child's medicine. The quiet pride of a handler feeding birds before dawn. The laugh of a friend who always bought noodles after a win. The Sabungeros were not statistics. They were our neighbors, flawed and hopeful, chasing a living in a system that turned their routine into a net. The truth lives in several places, in banking records that show who paid whom, in cell phone pings that draw a lattice of movement, in the testimonies of drivers who looked away and now can't sleep, at the shoreline where the lake keeps its secrets. It also lives in the courage of officers who will cross a thin blue line to prosecute colleagues, and in prosecutors willing to spend years on a case that wins no elections. Because it is not one disappearance, but many. Because the alleged involvement of those sworn to protect us cuts deeper than any blade. Because the idea of a mass grave in the beloved lake tells citizens that evil doesn't always hide. It sometimes anchors itself in the middle of our map and dares us to notice. Justice here is patience with teeth. It is task forces that do not dissolve when the cameras leave. It is witness protection that means protection. It is forensic budgets that rival the money made in the pits. It is the humility to exhume lakes and revisit assumptions. And yes, it is prison bars for enforcers, for masterminds, and for anyone who wore a badge as if it were a mask. We end where families live, in the pause between a doorbell and a heartbeat. Maybe tonight a text will arrive. Maybe tomorrow a name will finally be spoken in court. Until then, the question remains, how many vanished men does it take for a nation to say, never again? To the disappeared Sabungeros, to the families who keep candles lit, and to the officers still pushing against the dark, this story is for you. We will remember the names you speak. We will listen for answers beneath the water. And we will keep asking the question power hates most. Where are they? This documentary is for information and public awareness. It does not promote gambling or violence. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Allegations described here are based on reports and ongoing investigations. Missing posters in Luzon echo another chorus, this time near Delhi, where a drain answered the question no one wanted to ask. The Nithari. A narrow lane in a quiet neighborhood near Delhi. Children vanish one after another. Parents knock on doors that never open. And then behind a single house human bones begin to surface from a drain. The nation stops breathing. Nithari, on the edge of Noida, looked ordinary. Small homes, migrant families, school uniforms at dawn, street vendors by dusk. In 2005, a pattern began. A child wouldn't come home. Then another. Parents filed complaints. Some were told the children had probably run away. Posters went up. The police ledger filled with the word missing. But the urgency never matched the fear. At the end of a lane stood a two-story house addressed D5. It belonged to a businessman, Maninder Singh Pandher. His domestic help, Surinder Kohli, kept mostly to the back. Neighbors noticed little beyond the high gate and the quiet comings and goings of cars. Parents searching for children had passed that wall many times. They did not know that the drain behind it would soon rewrite Indian criminal history. Late 2006, a search for one missing girl leads community members to a stench behind D5. In the filth of the open drain, something pale, a small hand, bone-white. Police are called. They pull up more remains, skulls, bones, clothing, bangles. The yard yields more. The drains yield more. What had been a rumor of evil becomes visible, undeniable. Television trucks rush in. Nithari is no longer a place. It's a wound. Mothers scream at barricades. Fathers demand names. Children stare at TV screens and learn the word dismembered. The question grows claws. How could this happen here in a middle-class enclave, under streetlights, near police posts? The answer lands like an indictment. Because the poor can be invisible, because warnings were dismissed, because a missing child in a slum street doesn't ring as loud as a missing car from a gated house. Within hours, police arrest Surinder Kohli. He is questioned for days. Pandher is held too. Investigators describe confessions, methods, and the timeline. Children and young women lured near the gate, taken inside, murdered. Body parts disposed of in drains and yards. The alleged pattern is chilling in its routine predation disguised as ordinary errands, horror disguised as household waste. The case moves from local police to the Central Bureau of Investigation. Forensics teams catalog bones, match remains to families where possible, and try to reconstruct lives from fragments. Rumors ripple about organ trade, about satanic cults, most of which investigators later discount. What remains is brutal enough without myth. Serial killings, dismemberment, and a disposal ground behind a single home. Identification is slow and harrowing. A bangle recognized. Address remembered. A DNA match months later. Grief comes in waves, first when a child vanishes, then when hope runs out, and again when the law speaks in terms like exhibit, sample, chain of custody. Parents learn procedures they never wanted to know. The emptiness in their homes is filled with paperwork. Nithari becomes more than a murder case. It's an audit of policing. Why were complaints ignored? Why did patrols not change when patterns emerged? Why were tips from parents treated as noise until a drain forced everyone to listen? Committees are formed, inquiries opened, promises made. But the hardest question remains the simplest. If the first child had mattered enough, would the 15th still be alive? Convicted in multiple cases and receives death sentences in several. Pandher faces convictions in some cases and acquittals in others as proceedings and appeals stretch over years. Legal positions shift. Orders are stayed, reviewed, and sometimes reversed. Families sit through hearings that reopen wounds but are necessary to affirm the state's duty to prove, not merely allege. The media descends, amplifying every development. Viewers toggle between outrage and exhaustion. Activists point to class. Most victims came from migrant and working-class families, the very people whose alarms are easiest to ignore. Policy debates follow about missing child protocols, forensic capacity, neighborhood policing, and the need for trained investigators who treat poor families as citizens, not statistics. There is a temptation to mythologize monsters. But the Nithari killings remind us, evil can look like a back gate, a routine errand, a man with a calm voice. It can live behind a wall you walk past every day. It can exist because systems fail and communities are taught not to pry. The most frightening thing about Nithari isn't that it happened in a slum or a wilderness, it's that it happened in a neighborhood many considered safe. First, every missing child report must trigger action. No class filters, no moral judgments, no delays. Second, forensic infrastructure saves lives. Evidence speaks when witnesses cannot. Third, community vigilance is not gossip, it is survival. And finally, accountability must reach the level where failure occurred. Whether at a desk that stamped runaway or a command that dismissed patterns as coincidence. Official counts speak of at least 16 children and young women. But each number is a name, a birthday, a nickname shouted from a balcony at dusk. The case file is a cemetery of the ordinary, homework not finished, sandals left by a door, a mother waiting with a plate of food gone cold. Nithari forced India to confront a truth. Safety is not the absence of crime. It is the presence of a state that moves when the marginalized speak. The drains behind D5 have long been cleared. But the lesson remains where the city can see it, etched into the memory of a lane where children once played. May the memory of those lost keep the doors of every police station open, the ears of every official awake, and the eyes of every neighbor kinder. For the children of Nithari and for every parent still searching, we remember. We will not look away again. And while Nithari exposed policing failures, Bangkok revealed calculation, a debt, a trap, and a plan to erase a human being. Acid Bath Murderer of Bangkok 2017. Bangkok 2017. A businessman stops answering his phone. A money deal has soured. Within days, rumors surface of a house, a gang, and barrels that hiss. What investigators uncover will horrify a city that thought such brutality belonged to another era. Kazuhiko Okada was known for being methodical, meetings on time, accounts in order, calls returned. When those rhythms broke, friends noticed. A message left on read. A meeting missed without apology. Then a full day with no response. By the second day, the quiet felt wrong. A missing person report followed, and the clock started. In the weeks before he vanished, Okada had argued with a wealthy Thai woman he'd done business with, money changing hands. Promises of returns, documents that needed just a little more time. Those close to him described tension that had curdled into threat. It wasn't only about cash. It was about face, control, and who would be allowed to walk away without paying. A meeting was arranged, supposedly to settle accounts. The address sounded harmless enough. The instructions were specific. Come alone. Bring papers. Let's finish this. He told one person where he was going just in case. It didn't matter. The plan waiting for him was already in motion. What happened next was not improvisation, it was design. According to investigators, Okada was restrained, killed, and dismembered. Barrels and corrosive chemicals were ready. There were gloves, masks, and a timetable for disposal. In this script, there are no accidents, only decisions. Decisions to erase a life, and then to try to erase the traces. Even careful plans fray, a license plate caught on a camera. A phone that moved in a pattern different from the one its owner always kept. Cash withdrawn just before the meeting. Cash never spent afterward. Detectives mapped these points on a board and drew lines: who called whom, who rented what. Who stood to gain when a debt no longer existed because the man who demanded it didn't either. Search warrants followed. Behind a gate, investigators found what they feared. Containers that stung the air. Stains on flooring that had been scrubbed too quickly. Tools that did not belong in a home. The smell told a story. The drains told another. Forensics took samples. The lab spoke the language of certainty that grief demands. No single person could orchestrate a crime this complex without help. The woman at the center, investigators said, did not work alone. There were men who fetched supplies, a driver who did not ask questions, a fixer who knew how to find a place with few neighbors. Some obeyed out of fear. Others out of money. Each person had a job. Each job helped swallow the evidence. Arrests came in waves. Some suspects were found at condominiums. Others tried to slip away to safer districts. In interviews, stories shifted: first confusion, then partial admissions, then fingers pointed in all directions. But the physical evidence did not point. It indicated bank transfers, text messages, traced purchases of chemicals. The picture sharpened. A money dispute turned into a plan to silence a creditor permanently. Prosecutors presented a timeline that clicked like gears. The defense raised doubts. Who swung which blow? Who poured what? Who merely stood nearby? The law, as it must, demanded specifics. But intention leaves footprints and preparation is its shadow. The court weighed motive, preparation, and the grim choreography of the aftermath. Judgments followed, with penalties reflecting the cruelty and calculation alleged and proved against those responsible. Why did this story disturb so many? Because it felt medieval and high-tech, at once barrels and acid in a city of glass towers and fiber optic lines. Because the mastermind, by all accounts, moved in circles of privilege and ease. Because the choice of disposal was not only to kill but to erase, as if a human life were a ledger entry that could be dissolved when inconvenient. For those who loved Okada, justice is a thin comfort. There is no grave to tend in the way families hope for. There is paperwork, hearings, a translation of every memory into exhibits and testimony. There is the ache of unresolved rituals. No last look, no farewell. Only the knowledge of what was taken and how deliberately it was done. First, money disputes escalate fastest when one side believes reputation is armor. It is not. Second, criminal sophistication often hides in the ordinary rental receipts, hardware stores, a quiet house with thick curtains. Third, investigative persistence matters. Cameras, purchase trails, phone data, and forensics can speak for the dead when no witness dares. We must demand systems that track missing adults with the urgency reserved for children. Commercial registries that flag suspicious chemical buys. And witness protection that allows the hesitant to become brave. And we must insist that status buys lawyers, not leniency. The richer the defendant, the more transparent the process must be, so the verdict, whatever it is, can be believed. The story of the acid bath murder in Bangkok is a map of choices. To lure, to kill, to dissolve, to lie, and then, on the other side, to notice, to follow, to test, to prove. One set of choices erased a life. Another set stitched together enough truth that a court could speak. For Kazuhiko Okada, we say his name so he is not reduced to a headline or a method. For the city, we say this: modernity is not steel and glass. It is a refusal to let power rewrite the value of a human being. These stories end on paper with verdicts, transfers, and timelines, but for families, the day never truly ends. Justice is not just a headline. It's a practice we insist on together. If this episode helped you see the patterns of power, neglect, and courage, help us keep going. Like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Share this with someone who believes in accountability. And to the families who still wait, we see you, we hear you, and we won't look away.